I picked up the Lumix S9 primarily as a photo camera, something to complement my S5 Mark II, and while it has nice video features on paper, there's a lot of compromises that I heard made it not quite so great when it comes to video. So I got it primarily for taking pictures, which has worked out great. It obviously has the L mount, and so I can use all my L mount glass from my S5 Mark II along with my S9, and it's a great complementary full frame pairing. This is super small, compact, lightweight, of course, but it also has this great added benefit of I can't get it to overheat. Now, that is kind of a really grand statement. I'm sure you can get this thing to overheat. However, while treating it delicately, while treating it with some, kid gloves, being very gentle with it. Currently, it's been recording for an hour and 46 minutes, and there's no thermal warning. There's no issues on the display. I've just been recording continuously for an hour and 45 minutes, and it feels warm. I actually temped it at around 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is warm, not dangerously warm in hand. And what's interesting about the S9 is that when it first launched, there was a built-in recording limit. I think it was 15 minutes or something very aggressive, where it basically you can't record for more than 15 minutes. And Lumix, I think wisely so, and we're going to get into this, decided to release a firmware update for the S9 that allows you to turn that record limit off, and it comes with a huge disclaimer when you do it in the menu. It'll say, it can overheat, it can get really warm, be very careful. If you're turning this off, make sure you know what you're doing. And so you do, after the firmware update, you do have to go into the menu and turn off that recording limit, which is kind of a gotcha if you think like, oh, the record limit's gone. Well, you have to go take that extra manual step in the menu and turn it off. But not only have I been testing it just today, just sitting here plugged into a battery, just recording for basically as long as it goes. And I'll probably put a info in the description. I'll put a little text box saying how long it actually recorded for before it overheated. But I think at this point, it's fair to say that given some reasonable limitations, I'm only recording 4K 24. I'm not using the highest bit rates. I'm using my standard 150 megabit. The kind of normal generic, I call it kind of like my Goldilocks settings, where it's not the insanely high spec stuff that you can do with some Lumix cameras, which are valuable if you're doing anything, like a movie, a commercial, something really high end, and you want to use a Lumix camera. You can use the higher bit rates. You can obviously shoot ProRes in some situations. You can shoot RAW in some situations. But for me, general purpose, I like to keep that kind of like best of both worlds, where I'm getting the quality with like a decent bit rate, something like 150 megabits or 200 megabits, depending on the frame rate, but I'm also not wasting file space. I'm not storing crazy amounts of data just to have that ultimate pixel peeping quality. Goldilocks, best of both worlds, kind of find that happy medium in between. So my general purpose, general shooting is kind of that sweet spot, right? The 150 megabits or 200 megabits. I'm not shooting 60 frames a second on the S9. That would be cropped anyway, which I don't think is the, best use of a full frame sensor, is to shoot 60, but then have it cropped. You can definitely do it, and it's only APS-C. But there's some limitations. I do think it's funny when people talk about the S9, a lot of times when it gets mentioned, they'll always say like, oh, it doesn't have an EVF, it doesn't have a hot shoe. It's like it's always the thing called out, the limitations of the camera, which is kind of interesting compared to how other cameras get talked about. We're often not saying, X camera, with these limitations every time it's mentioned. But for whatever reason, with the Lumix S9, it's always talked about with these limitations in place. There's no EVF. There's no hot shoe. What are you going to do? Well, okay, good to know. And I do think it's interesting, the S9 versus the G9 Mark II, which I was very frustrated with. You can go back in my feed and watch the videos of me testing the G9 Mark II and it overheating, and why I found that so frustrating, because it's all about perspective. And I think this is why Lumix was very wise to release the S9 with the recording limit built in, and then a firmware update released to basically take that away. And when you do so, the big disclaimer, hey, this camera could overheat. You may not have, the full capabilities of it all the time. And I think with that caveat up front and in your face, as if like that's the marketing, it's almost like this incredible feat that the Lumix S9 doesn't overheat. I used it on a recent shoot, the Lumix S9, and I used it all day recording my standard 4K 24, 150 megabit. And it was great. It was wonderful. Such a tiny, compact camera that can record at the same quality as my S5 Mark II. And using them side by side as an A camera and a B camera worked really, really well for my needs. Now, granted, this was indoors. It was a controlled environment. I knew, again, I was being gentle. I was being delicate with my treatment of the S9, because if it's up front and in your face that, hey, this thing could overheat, you're going to have a different perspective than what I came to the G9 Mark II thinking, which was basically every reviewer under the sun talking about the Lumix G9 Mark II as if it's a GH6 with, phase detect autofocus back in time when that was kind of new to the Micro Four Thirds camera system. Now we have the GH7, which obviously fixes all of those problems and more because it has the built-in fans for proper thermal management. But at the time when the G9 Mark II came out, it was a photo camera, but everyone was talking about how great the video features were, and this is so amazing, and this is so amazing, and this is so amazing. And then I start using it and it overheats on me. And that perspective shift, those expectations going into it, so radically different. And it's smart for companies, I think, like Lumix, like Sony, like Canon, like Nikon. If there's a severe limitation of no EVF or no hot shoe, or hey, this thing will overheat, or hey, there's no headphone jack. That's the other goofy quirk about the Lumix S9. There's no headphone jack. So if you are expecting to run it as kind of your main camera and you want to run audio to it, you can plug a microphone in, but you can't monitor with headphones. So those limitations, if you put those front and center, all of a sudden when you're able to kind of work around them or get past them for something that was, relatively cheap, very affordable, because, a lot of people, budget is a consideration. So the Lumix S9 is quite impressive considering how small, compact it is. And it will get warm. I'm sure it will overheat. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's the best video camera or it's so amazing and it'll never overheat. That's maybe a little bit of clickbait. But in my needs and my purposes, in a controlled environment, indoors, recording basically all day, again, recording continuous. Now I'm at an hour and 52 minutes. It's very rare that you would want to go beyond that. I've heard people talk about using their S9 for concerts and events and recording for 3 hours straight. Again, I'll put that information in the description of how long I'm able to get this run. I actually have to plug it back into the battery, which is kind of one of the nice features. I'm using these NPF batteries from SmallRig. These are the newer ones that have the USB-C output on the side. So I can just plug in USB-C PD to the S9, and I can basically have all day battery life. I have a 512 gigabyte card in here, so I can record, I think, up to over 7 hours straight continuous if I want to, and if it'll last that long. So if you're trying to get the most out of your systems, push them to the limit. I think that's fun to kind of see where's the breaking point. And then also to know those base limitations from that marketing perspective. If you're going to tell me something is a video camera, if you're going to tell me something's a photo camera, you're going to tell me something can do all these things, it's got all the bells and whistles, make sure that they deliver, or be smart and put those limitations up front and then maybe pull them back a little bit. It would be really, really annoying if the S9 still had this recording limit built into the firmware, into the software, saying you can't record more than 15 minutes. Well, that's silly considering I'm currently recording almost 2 hours straight. So the camera is capable. Now, are there some limitations? Of course, it is getting warm. It doesn't have the crazy robust fans that you get on something like the GH7 or even the fans on the S5 Mark II. It's a different type of camera. But I really like that it can do so much. And that's quite impressive compared to, like I said, with the expectations, or basically not advertising, because it wasn't said by Lumix directly, but certainly in the reviewer community space. The G9 Mark II, it's basically like a GH6, but it's not. You can't say that if it's not actually like that. I wouldn't tell you that the S9 is basically an S5 Mark II. It's not. Although they complement each other very, very nicely, the S5 Mark II is definitely a better, stronger contender for a video photo hybrid than something like the S9, which is a photo camera that can also do really cool stuff with video. I like that Lumix doesn't artificially take away these things like open gate or shutter angle just because it's a photo camera. Give us all those video features. Give us the amazing, stuff that makes Lumix so cool. But then also just let us know transparently, upfront, in the marketing, in the commercials, at the forefront of the messaging. Make sure people know all those limitations so when they buy something And then they realize, oh wait, this can actually do more than I expected. Now it's a delight. It's the same thing when you're working with clients, right? You kind of under promise and over deliver. And that's so smart from a psychological perspective, instead of over promising and then under delivering. That leads to nothing but disappointment, defeat. People's expectations are crushed. Versus if you set a low bar and you surpass it, that's such a delight. It's such an amazing feeling to pick up a camera and go, wow, I thought you were really limited, but you're actually quite impressive, all things considered. I'm not going to grab the S9 as my only camera if I'm going out to film something. I'm going to treat it delicately, as I have been, but also know that, hey, in my kit, something tiny, super compact, super small, fits right in there. Can use any of the other L lens. I mean, the lenses are the biggest part of the equation these days. They can make cameras super tiny, super compact. They can't get past the limitation of the lens size though. So the lenses are always going to be the biggest, heaviest stuff probably. But I have a great B camera right in my kit that takes up basically no space and just works so well with the whole system. Still has vlog, still has, everything you could ever want. But again, it's not my go-to primary video camera because I don't want to be in a situation where it turns into a brick just because it overheats because I'm filming outside and it happens to be sunny and kind of warm. I'm sure the S9 would fail in that situation, but indoor environments, relatively controlled, atmosphere or set, you have air conditioning, something like that. I'm sure it's great for like a YouTuber indoors. Great if you're doing some kind of live concert venue kind of thing. I'd probably have it be like the closest camera, so I'm not just assuming it's live and recording the whole time. I'd want to monitor it a little bit, but still having that confidence to go, hey, I know you can actually get through this, little guy, little S9 buddy. That's a really nice feeling to have those limitations transparent up front, literally baked into the software saying you have this fixed record limit, and then to have it removed. I think it's such a wise, smart decision that Lumix made and how they approached the S9 compared to all the, again, not marketing, but just the hype around the G9 Mark II. Phase detect, finally in micro four thirds. Holy cow, everyone get excited, and then realize, oh, this camera is just okay. It's just like more or less a photo camera. Don't get too excited for video. Had they told everyone to wait for the GH7, they might have sold less cameras, but that would have been a lot more honest, I think, in terms of putting that messaging up front. So it's really just what's communicated. I think you can apply this to your own life, like I said, with clients, setting those expectations up front, under promise, over deliver in terms of timelines and speed. Hey, when am I going to get this done? Set a good buffer for yourself and then exceed those expectations. Don't be the person that takes 2 or 3 weeks longer to deliver something than what you told somebody. Keep your promises, and if you can, exceed them. Be faster, be better, you just be cheaper in some situations. It really just comes down to what are you messaging? How are you communicating with the people? What are their expectations? And then that whole paradigm shifts when you change that perspective and how someone's approaching something. So for me, for the S9, I'm actually quite impressed. I used it all day on a shoot. I've got it running here in the studio at 2 hours now. Still no warning, no issue. It's not telling me it's going to overheat or anything. And I think that's quite impressive because I came from the perspective of there's these limitations ahead of time versus the other end of the spectrum. If you told me the S9 was basically like an S5 Mark II, it's basically the same thing, but smaller and cheaper, and oh, it's so better, it's basically the same thing. Well, I'd be really disappointed immediately the moment it would overheat on me. So, and of course, all the other limitations. No headphone jack, no EVF, no hot shoe, all those things. But I don't know. I just want to communicate if you're thinking about getting the S9 as like a B camera or C camera, or you're interested in one, picking it up because you think it's kind of cool. I like the form factor a lot. It's not the most comfortable to use and operate, but for size-wise, I think it makes a lot of sense for certain types of needs. Just an extra camera body you can throw in your kit. If you were thinking about picking one up, know that the record limit was not a necessity. It was not a thing that like, even if, I kind of thought, I'll turn off the record limit and it'll record for like 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and then it'll overheat. But so far, so good. And for my shoot, I wasn't recording continuous all day, but it was pretty heavy, kind of starting recording, would stop for a moment, start again, start, stop. I don't know, the way we normally record things. You're just constantly capturing more or less, but you're starting and stopping throughout the day. So far with the continuous record, that's been good as well. So I kind of wanted to do those two things before I put this video together and really say that, yeah, it gets warm, but you know, not scarily so. I've had laptops in the past, the old Apple MacBook Pros back in the day would basically cook your lap. They got so hot. I think they could almost boil water probably. But the Lumix S9, I'm very happy with it. I'm really impressed by its performance. And if it's something you've been on the fence about, maybe picking up because you're worried, oh, is it going to overheat on me? Well, it could. I would be definitely careful with it. I'd be smart about what you're exposing it to in terms of temperature and conditions. And if you're trying to get the highest frame rates and the most bit rates out of it, then maybe dial it back a little bit and lower those expectations. But if you just need something that can record general purpose and fit right into your kit, I think that could be the Lumix S9.